I was standing in the middle of a hardware store on a Tuesday afternoon, holding a box of light bulbs I didn't know how to install, when it hit me, not gently, not gradually, but like a wave you didn't see coming because you were too busy looking at the horizon. I was 63 years old. My husband Oleander had been gone for 2 years. My daughter Saoirse lived in another country, and my son Thibaut called on Sundays, when he remembered. And I, Viradi, a woman who had once organized community fundraisers, hosted dinners for 14, and navigated the chaos of raising 2 wildly different human beings, could not figure out how to change a light bulb in the ceiling fan without feeling like the whole world had shrunk to the size of a broom closet. I put the box back on the shelf. I drove home in the dark, and that night, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea I didn't really want, I made a decision that would unravel everything I thought I knew about what it means to grow old on your own terms. I decided to stop pretending. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way people announce things on social media or write open letters to their past selves. I mean, I stopped pretending in the quiet, daily, invisible way that most women my age have become absolute masters of. The kind of pretending where you say, "I'm fine, I just like the quiet," when what you actually mean is, "I haven't spoken out loud to another human being in 4 days, and I'm starting to talk to my houseplants, and the one by the window is getting a little too much of my inner monologue." What followed that night was not a transformation. It was something slower, stranger, and far more honest. And it gave me 3 rules, brutal ones, the kind your family quietly hopes you never stumble onto. Because if you do, you stop needing to be rescued. And some people, even the ones who love you, have quietly built their identity around your needing rescue. So let me tell you about them. The first rule landed in my life through a woman named Thessaly. I met her at a community garden 2 towns over, where I had started volunteering mostly because I needed somewhere to put my hands while my mind was still trying to figure out what chapter of life I was in. Thessaly was 79. She had silver hair that she wore in a single braid down her back, dirt permanently under her fingernails, and the most unsentimental eyes I had ever seen on a human face. Not cold, just completely undeceived. We were repotting seedlings one morning when she said, without looking up, "You know what keeps most women your age miserable?" I said I had a few theories. She said, "They keep waiting for permission." I asked her what she meant. She set down her trowel and looked at me directly. Permission to take up space. Permission to want things. Permission to build a life that looks nothing like what the brochure promised. She picked the trowel back up. They spent 40 years asking if it was okay. And then the person they were asking isn't there anymore, and they don't know how to stop asking. So they just freeze. I went home and sat with that for 3 days, because she was right, and I knew she was right, and it made me furious in the way that only the truth can make you furious. Not at her, but at the years, at the slow accumulation of small surrenders I had dressed up as compromises and called them maturity. This is rule 1. Stop waiting for the vote that will never be called. When Oleander was alive, we made decisions together. I don't regret that. I genuinely don't. But somewhere in the architecture of our shared life, I had quietly outsourced my own authority. Not over big things, I was never a passive woman, but over the texture of daily life, over what I wanted the next decade to feel like, over the small and enormous question of what I, Virati, actually desired when no one's preferences were in the room with mine. After he died, I kept waiting for a consensus I could never reach, because I was still trying to factor in an opinion that no longer existed. I would think about painting the study a deep, almost black green, and then think, Oleander never liked dark rooms. I would think about spending 3 weeks traveling alone through the highlands of a country I'd always wanted to see. And then I'd hear some ghost of practicality. Whose voice was it, really? Telling me it wasn't sensible. The vote was never going to be called. The quorum was gone. Thessaly's first rule is brutal because it requires you to grieve something most people don't even recognize as a loss. The permission structure itself. The scaffolding of shared decision-making. You don't just miss the person, you miss having someone to clear your ideas with. And until you name that specific grief, you stay frozen at the threshold of your own life, hand raised, waiting to be recognized, speaking to an empty chair. The day I painted that study green, a color called Evernight, and it is extraordinary, I cried for 2 hours afterward. Not because I regretted it, because I finally understood that I had always been allowed. The second rule did not come from a wise woman in a garden. It came from the worst 4 months of my life, which arrived about 14 months after Oleander's passing, and which I will describe to you plainly because I think plainness is the only thing that serves anyone in this particular territory. I collapsed inward, not in a visible way. I kept my appointments, I answered messages, I showed up to Thibaut's birthday gathering and brought the right wine and laughed at the right moments. But something had gone out inside me like a pilot light. And the cold it left behind was not the grief of losing Oleander. I had moved through most of that already. It was a different cold entirely. It was the cold of realizing that I had spent so many years being necessary to other people that I had no idea what I was when necessity was removed. Who was Virati when nobody needed her? I genuinely did not know. I tried to fill it with busyness. I volunteered for 3 organizations simultaneously. I reorganized every cabinet in my house. I read 11 books in 6 weeks, retaining almost nothing. I was performing productivity the way a person with insomnia performs sleep, lying perfectly still, eyes closed, fooling no one, especially not themselves. It was my neighbor, Zolinda, a retired cartographer who had lived alone for 20 years and seemed to possess an almost alarming quantity of inner peace, who said something that cracked me open. She had come over to return a dish, and I had spent approximately 40 minutes telling her all the things I was doing, all the places I was going, all the projects I was pursuing. and she listened with perfect patience and then said quietly, "That sounds exhausting. When do you just exist?" I didn't understand the question. She tried again. "When do you let yourself be a person who isn't doing anything for anyone, including yourself?" I told her I didn't think I knew how. She nodded like that was the most reasonable thing she'd ever heard. Most people your age don't. You were never taught that your presence has value without your function. This is rule 2. Your worth is not a service you provide. It sounds simple. It is not simple. For women of my generation, utility was not just a virtue, it was identity. You were a mother, a wife, a caretaker, a coordinator, a keeper of important dates and emotional atmospheres. The moment those roles hollowed out, through loss, through distance, through children who grew into their own lives as they should, the self underneath was often startlingly unfamiliar. I had to learn to sit in a room and do nothing, and not feel like I was failing some invisible evaluation. I had to learn to take a walk with no destination and no outcome, and call it a full and legitimate use of an afternoon. I had to learn to enjoy my own company not as a consolation prize, but as a genuine pleasure, the ways Olinda seemed to move through her solitary life, with the satisfaction of someone who has exactly what they want. That took time. It took discomfort. It took about 30 mornings of sitting on my back porch with coffee, staring at the garden, feeling useless before the feeling gradually shifted into something else. A quietness, then a presence, then something that I can only describe as a kind of companionship with myself that I had been too busy to cultivate for the previous 35 years. The brutal part of this rule is what it reveals about the people around you. Because when you stop performing usefulness, some relationships quietly dissolve. Thibaut and I went through a strange, tender renegotiation that took almost a year. He had been used to calling me with problems, and I had been used to solving them. When I started saying, "What do you think you'll do?" instead of immediately producing a solution, he was briefly confused, and then briefly irritated, and then, slowly, beautifully, he became someone who could sit with me without needing me to be his answer machine. Our relationship deepened in the space that opened when I stopped filling every silence with helpfulness. Not everyone survives that renegotiation. Some people, as it turns out, were only present for the services. And that is painful. And it is also useful information. The third rule is the one families fear most. It is the rule that, once learned, makes you genuinely independent in a way that the people who love you might quietly find inconvenient. Not because they wish you harm, most of them don't, but because your independence removes a certain narrative they have been carrying, often without realizing it, about who you are and what you need and what role they play in your story. I discovered it through Nacien. Nacien was 68 when we met at a weekend workshop on financial literacy for women over 60. a class I had enrolled in, mostly because Oleander had handled all of our investing, and I had suddenly found myself staring at account statements that might as well have been written in a language spoken only by migratory birds. Nasién had been divorced for 11 years. She had raised 3 children, mostly alone after her divorce, put all 3 through school, started a small landscaping business, sold it at 62, and was now, by her own description, aggressively unbotherable. Over the course of that weekend, I watched her ask questions without embarrassment, challenge the instructor without apology, and take notes in a small notebook, with the focused attention of someone who understood that information was not charity, it was armor. On the last evening, I asked her how she'd gotten there. To that particular quality of self-possession. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I stopped letting the people who loved me define the ceiling of what I was capable of. I asked her to say more. When you age alone, she said, the people around you, children, siblings, old friends, they develop a picture of you. And the picture is kind, it really is. They love you. But it's a picture from before you were tested, before you found out what you could actually carry. She paused. They want to help, and their help is real. But their help also comes with a version of you that has limits. And if you accept their version, you start living inside it. This is rule 3. Do not inherit the ceiling someone else built for your life. I have watched this happen to women I care about deeply. Women who are brilliant, resourceful, funny, and capable, who have quietly allowed the well-intentioned protectiveness of their families to calcify into limitation. Their children handle the finances because that seems easier. Their siblings manage the health decisions because that seems safer. Their friends decide where they'll spend the holidays because that seems kinder. And each small surrender is wrapped in love and offered with genuine care, and is, underneath all of that, a slow subtraction of the self. The family does not do this maliciously. I want to be clear about that. Thibaut and Saoirse love me. They are good people. But love and limitation can live in the same house. And it takes a very particular kind of attention to tell them apart. After my conversation with Nasién, I went home and made a list. Not a list of grievances. I want to be precise here. But a list of things I had quietly stopped doing because someone who loved me had indicated, through word or expression or simple repetition, that I wasn't quite up to them. Driving long distances alone, managing my own investment portfolio, traveling internationally without a companion, having opinions about politics out loud, pursuing a completely new creative practice at 63, which in my case turned out to be ceramics, which I am still genuinely bad at, and which brings me an unreasonable amount of joy. Each thing on the list had a face attached to it, a kind face, a worried face, a face that had said in one way or another, "Are you sure? Are you really sure?" And I, obedient to love, had folded the desire up and put it away. I unfolded them, one by one. Over the following year, I unfolded every single one, not to prove something, not in defiance, but because I had been a woman of 70, I could see her clearly now, who had given up driving on highways, who had never learned what her own money was doing, who had never stood in a foreign city alone and navigated it and felt the specific pride of that navigation. And that woman deserved better from me. The brutal truth at the center of Rule 3 is this: no one is coming to expand your ceiling. That is your work. The people who love you will build you a comfortable room with a low roof and call it shelter. And it is shelter, and it is kind, and it is also not enough. You have to be the one who opens the roof. You have to be the one who decides what the view is allowed to be. I am 65 now. The study is still that gorgeous, impossible green. I have taken 2 solo trips, one of which involved a train journey through a mountain range that made me cry at the window, in the best way a person can cry, full of largeness rather than loss. My ceramics are still lopsided. Thessaly, who came to see my small studio, said they had character, which I believe is a generous interpretation of structural inconsistency. I choose to accept it. So Linda and I have dinner on the first Friday of every month, and we often sit afterward without talking, which used to frighten me, and now feels like a form of deep abundance. Thibaut calls on Sundays and Wednesdays now, and sometimes just to tell me something funny, with no problem attached. I have not become a different person. I have become more of the person I was always moving toward, before I got distracted by all the things that needed doing, all the people who needed tending, all the ceilings I was handed and obediently respected. The 3 rules are not gentle. They will ask you to grieve the permission structure. They will ask you to sit in a room without performing your value. They will ask you to reach past the ceiling built by people who love you and find out what is on the other side of it. But on the other side of all 3 is something I did not have a word for until recently. Naciene gave me the word. She called it sovereignty. Not independence as deprivation, the absence of love, the absence of community, the solitary life as tragedy, but independence as sovereignty, the deep, unhurried knowledge that you are the final authority on the shape and texture of your own life, that you are not waiting, that you are not asking, that you are not living inside someone else's worried and well-meaning picture of who you are. You are the painter. The study is green. The ceiling is open. And if any part of what I've shared today landed somewhere true inside you, if you heard something in Thessaly's voice, or Zolinda's question, or Naciene's word, I want to ask you to do one thing before you leave this space. Subscribe. Not for me, not to become part of an audience, but because this channel is a place where women who are navigating this exact terrain, alone or nearly alone, in the middle of extraordinary 2nd and 3rd chapters refusing the low ceiling. Gather to think out loud together. Every week I bring you a conversation, a story, a set of honest and sometimes uncomfortable ideas about what it actually looks like to age on your own terms. No softening, no brochure version. Just the green room, just the open roof. I'll see you next week.